Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving into an updated Aeldari Codex tier list for the specific detachments in the Codex. So we're going to be looking at 9 different detachments that the Aeldari have access to and ranking them based on their competitive merit. So unlike the previous detachment, I am going to be looking at these more from a competitive standpoint this time around. Last time I kind of looked at them based on, what I thought was the best detachment. And this time we're going to look at them competitively. So the great thing about this is we don't really have a lot of data yet past the recent nerfs, right? We just got nerfed the other day, and any kind of tournament data that's going to be coming out, a lot of the tournaments are going to be using, the old rules of the, before the June data slate. So we're going to get a fresh start here. So my kind of takes are going to be based purely on what I think is going to be the strongest and not necessarily based on current data. So we've seen a lot of nerfs. The aspect warriors in our codex, most of them did get nerfed at some point in time. Also, Ynnead took a huge nerf, huge dicking. And basically what that means is Ynnead, of course, is not going to be the top dog it once was. Having said that, I think that opens the field up to a lot of different detachments that we can use to great success. And I've actually had some changes of heart about a few of these detachments. So this list is going to be way different than the list I made in February when the Codex first came out. And I'm also going to have a lot more experience with all of these detachments because I've played many more games. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's look at, and we're going to basically rank them from best to worst. We're not going to be using an S tier to D tier ranking system just because I believe that, that's not probably the best way to look at a tier list. So, we're going to kind of rank them based on what I think is the worst to the best. All right, let's look at the number 9 slot. And a lot of you are probably thinking, well, we know where it's going to go here, right? And a lot of you are going to be absolutely correct. In 9th place, we're going to have the Armored Warhost. So, just like before, the problem with Armored Warhost is simply that the army rule allowing you to advance and shoot is not really that great because Aeldari flying vehicles are already very fast and they don't have trouble getting line of sight angles, typically speaking. The other problem with this detachment is that it doesn't have a lot of good stratagems. So the stratagem list is fairly lackluster. You do have a couple of good ones, but most of them are just simply something that you could easily get better of in other detachments. So for example, you have a 6-inch deep strike with a vehicle, which sounds really good, right? You can deep strike a wave serpent, for example, within 6 inches of something, and then you can disembark. And if you're using something like fire dragons with Fuegan, this means that you're automatically in melter range and stuff like that. The problem is you're spending a lot of CP and a lot of positioning ability and stuff like that because of course enemies can screen you out and so forth. You're spending a lot of time getting a result that you could just get if you just moved the wave serpent up with star engines, right? So a lot of these stratagems in Armored Warhost really aren't that great, right? We have a -2 to charge stratagem, which may seem cool, but at the end of the day, it's really not that strong. Maybe a little bit of a counter to things like deep striking Death Guard and stuff like that. But when you look at the other kind of stratagems, there's no real good damage strat. You get a reroll hit, reroll wound, and reroll damage stratagem, which honestly just is kind of lackluster in itself. And you have a lot of other stratagems in there that just don't really work, right? So in my honest opinion, Armored Warhost just not really that great. However, I do think it's better with the Codex than it is with the Index. I think that if you wanted to put together a fun, casual list with a bunch of weird stuff like fire prisms and vipers and stuff like that, you definitely could do that a little bit better now with the buffs that we have seen on Eldar vehicles. So we have seen Warwalkers go down in points, we've seen fire prisms go down in points, And I think both of those are great for Armored Warhost. So if you want to try it, the competitively speaking, the worst detachment in the Aeldari repertoire, then I think this is the time to try it. I'm going to be running this myself in a couple of weeks, seeing how good it is and kind of testing it out. Honestly, I played one game with it with the Codex. I still wasn't impressed with it, and it kind of just stayed there. I didn't touch it since. So, it is what it is, but I think definitely it's still the worst. Now, in number 8, you might be surprised. Some of you might actually be quite surprised by my choice here. But after extensive testing and play testing and, theory crafting and everything like that, I do believe that in number 8, we have the Spirit Conclave. Now, a lot of you are going to disagree with this, and I understand why. The Spirit Conclave is the Wraith detachment. Wraiths are really cool. They're really tough. And in a casual setting, a Wraith army can be really hard for an opponent to deal with. But in a competitive setting, the Spirit Conclave doesn't do anything that, other armies can't get around or just outdamage. So here's the problem with Spirit Conclave. On its face, it looks like the durability detachment. It looks like the detachment that wants to dominate primary objectives and so forth. The issue with this is that Wraith units are extremely expensive, so your army is going to be smaller than normal Eldari armies. You're going to have less units on the battlefield. Second, Wraith units are really not that durable. And I know that comes as a shock to some of you, because toughness 6 2-up save, of course they're durable. But there's a lot of armies out there that just punch through Wraith units like nothing, right? And we know this from multiple different sources. Death Guard are an army that basically has army-wide lethal hits. They have a lot of anti-infantry weapons, and they just shred Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades. And even Wraith Lords, to be honest. So that kind of sucks, right? And there's just a lot of factions in the game that have access to very powerful weaponry that can really hurt Wraiths. In the mirror matchup, it's probably one of the worst matchups for Spirit Conclave. Aeldari and Drukhari units can just absolutely rip this detachment apart. If you look at other factions, Ultramarines, things with, damage 3 profiles really rip apart Wraith Blades. Blade Guard veterans are really effective against them. Guilliman, Calgar, all the, basically staples of Ultramarines are really good. You get double oath. You get +1 to wound. Realistically, at the end of the day, even though at its face Spirit Conclave looks really durable, when you add in all the damage buffs and all that stuff that other armies are going to be getting, and basically people are going to be taking advantage of in competitive play, you have a detachment that has less units, less range damage, less board control, and overall less durability than other Eldar detachments. I know that seems weird, but if you think about it, most of our Eldar units can hide very effectively, and they're very effective at trading points for points, and Spirit Conclave just isn't. I haven't played a single game with Spirit Conclave in which I didn't almost get tabled by the end of the game, because it was just simply hard to survive out in the open. So yeah, Spirit Conclave not that great. Now, if we look at the enhancements and stratagems, there's also numerous issues with them. I don't really have many issues with the detachment rule itself. Getting battle focus on Wraiths is really cool. Getting +1 to hit and wound when an enemy unit kills a Psyker model against that specific unit is also good, although it's easy to play around. However, if you look at the stratagems, a lot of them just aren't that great, right? They seem good on paper, but when you really put them into practice, there's very few opportunities for success. I think probably the best stratagem for the Spirit Conclave is the -1 damage strat, which we'll be using every chance you can get. But other than that, really a lot of them are situational. Dev wounds on melee attacks is just okay, because you'll get a few more damage points in. It could be good if you roll well, but You know, without Fate dice, you can't guarantee that. Crushing Strides is a pretty good one. Gives, you know, Wraith Lords and Wraith Knights basically a tank shock ability when they can do mortal wounds when they charge in. Again, this is a nice thing, but it's not really worth the command points because most of the time, if you're running a Wraith Knight and you're charging it in, it's probably going to kill its target anyway. And the other news about Wraith Knights is, you know, breaking news here, they kind of suck. I've been running Wraith Knights I've run them probably 4 or 5 times now. I've tried different builds. I've tried the sword and board. I've tried the sun cannon and the shield. I've tried double wraith cannons. I've tried it all. And honestly, I'm not impressed. They don't do a lot of damage. They're not incredibly durable. And the moment you move them out into the open to do some damage, they die pretty instantly. So yeah, unfortunately, I think Spirit Conclave is just one tool short of being really good. I think you really have to lean into other units outside of Wraiths for Spirit Conclave to be any good. And I know that they won a GT, but I think that's probably due to the skill of the player and not necessarily the power of the detachment. Okay, so that's Spirit Conclave. Again, I really like it. It's just, it's not that effective. And honestly, I've had a lot of struggles with the detachment itself. All right, let's look at the 7th place detachment here. And guys, I hate to say it, but it's Ynnead. Now, I haven't played Ynnead since the nerfs, but what I can tell you is Ynnead lists have gone up significantly in points. They have been toned down as far as their rules, and they don't hit nearly as hard. And they have to pay for the Yvrain and Yncarne tax, both of which are now nerfed to oblivion. So you have to pay either 260 points for a Yncarne who can't even use Lethal Intent, or you have to pay 100 points for Yvrain, whose ability is trash. Being able to reroll 1s to wound is garbage. It's not a good ability, and if they had even changed it to where she could maybe reroll full wounds on objectives or something like that, I guess it would be a little bit better, but it still really just sucks because rerolling 1s to wound when most of our infantry is going to be needing 4s to wound is not great. It's not great at all. She can't join Howling Banshee, so she can't really benefit them. She can only really join Incubi as far as a strong combat unit, and Incubi are much worse as well. They got double nerfed. They can't do anything in combat anymore. So they're not that powerful. Other than that, Lethal Intent is basically a nothing burger now. You can't really use it effectively. If you do try to use it to its maximum effect, you're going to be out-traded very easily. Let me give you an example, right? Sacrificing a unit in your army so that another unit within 6 inches can move d6 plus 1 is not exactly a good way to get some extra movement out of your forces. So I think if you are playing Ynnead right now, I think the best way to go about this is the stratagems, which are still really strong. And it's why I say that Devoted of Ynnead is still better than Spirit Conclave, because all of the stratagems in Devoted are good. Sticking objectives after your unit dies on it is a great way to score some extra primary points. That still exists. Being able to shoot something after a model dies in your unit is a great way to get something out of bigger units, like Dire Avengers, right? So if somebody doesn't fully kill a unit of Dire Avengers on you, you can fight back with them, you can shoot back at a target. That's pretty good for 1 CP. Or Fire Dragons, right? Fire Dragons did go up, but if you kill a Fire Dragon and you don't kill the whole unit, you know, maybe the Fire Dragon squad dips out of line of sight of other units, but is still within line of sight of, you know, something, then you, for 1 CP, can shoot that unit, which is pretty good. Automatic fight on death for 2 CP is also a great stratagem. It really forces your opponent to have to engage you in ways that aren't very great for them. Of course, the problem with Ynnead as well, though, is that you can't take Phoenix Lords or Epic Heroes. So you can't take Eldrad. You can't take anything that's not Ynnead. So they're going to be lower on CP than other detachments because you can't take those abilities. And of course, Autarchs and Ynnead Archons have been nerfed in points, so they're more expensive. So yeah, Devoted of Ynnead, not that big of a fan. I mean, I do like their stratagems. Lethal hits and ignores cover is really good too for range attacks, by the way. But it's just not a strong detachment because it is lacking a detachment rule for the most part. I think if anybody looks at Lethal Intent and says that it's in a fine place now and it's perfectly balanced, they don't truly know Eldar, and they just should, probably look at that a little bit more deeply, because in most cases, you're just not going to be able to use Lethal Intent anymore. It was way too nerfed. Okay, let's look at number 6. So number 6 is going to be an interesting spot, and I honestly think there's only one detachment that belongs here, and that is going to be the Ghosts of the Webway. So the Ghosts of the Webway is cool. It's really an interesting detachment. You have things like being able to revive a Harlequin character once per game, and you could do that to each of your characters. You're probably going to have about 4 characters in your list, 3 Troop Masters, maybe a Solitaire, and maybe, well, you're definitely going to have the Solitaire, but maybe a Shadow Seer as well. So maybe 4 to 5 characters in your list, and that's pretty powerful. That can get you a lot of, extra value out of your army. The Ghost of the Webway also allows for some really interesting maneuvers. So being able to, pull a Harlequin unit into reserve and then redeploy it is really cool. Really like that stratagem. I really like the enhancements as well. Segarak's Coil is really cool, doing mortal wound damage on charge. Allows a Troop Master and a unit of Quins to hit really hard. Their detachment ability, allowing them to move over enemy units in the charge phase, is also weirdly good. I think that's pretty good as well. Honestly, it seems like it doesn't come up a lot, but it does help the unit when you get to consolidate 6. So as you guys know, the Troop Master gets to consolidate 6 inches with his unit, pylon 6 as well. So being able to jump over enemy models allows a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to consolidating. So you can actually get a lot of value out of that. And of course, OC2 Harlequins is a lot better than OC1 Harlequins when it comes to primary objective control. I think the problem with Ghosts of the Webway is it does rely on Aeldari units to tackle the harder targets. Harlequins are not exactly good at dealing with tough targets, and we're going to be pretty soon hitting a meta full of tough targets, right? Blood Angels just got a slew of buffs. Sanguinary Guard are like the bane of Harlequin units, being a 2+ save, having a 4+ invulnerable save, -1 to hit, -1 to wound, is going to be harder for Harlequins to deal with. So what Harlequins are going to have to really do is really bank on mortal wound damage to get through to the enemy. And when you need 6s, 6s might happen, they might not happen, right? So Harlequins can be good against those types of units, but they need to be rolling 6s, and they need to be using stratagems like grenades and Segarak's Coil to get the most out of their units. Death Guard, however, are going to be another problem, because Death Guard have a ton of flamer weapons, ton of Overwatch potential. They're really cheap units. Harlequins don't necessarily trade well into some of those units. Being at, a -1 to hit is really devastating for Harlequins, right? Having to hit with your fusion pistols on 4s is really skewing the math in favor of the Death Guard. And they're just really tough. Again, the Ghost of the Webway is going to have to depend a lot on mortal wounds to do a lot of their damage. So yeah, Ghost of the Webway I think can be strong. You can also use some, different Aeldari units for support. You can use things like Fire Dragons to hit those heavy targets, but Fire Dragons did see a significant nerf. So there is that. I still think Ghost of the Webway is one of the first detachments that we see here in this list that is tournament viable, which basically means that I believe a skilled player can go into a tournament with Ghost of the Webway and win. They just need the right list, they just need the right matchups, and I think they can do very well. Okay, so that's Ghost of the Webway. Now let's go on to the number 5 spot, the vaulted number 5 spot, and this is going to be where things start to get interesting. So I actually think that in number 5, we are going to have Aspect Host. So Aspect Host is a pretty strong detachment. It has a lot of great stratagems that revolve around dealing more damage. You have Warrior's Bane, which allows you to ignore a lot of modifiers, modifiers to the hit roll, ballistic skill, strength, damage, and armor. So that's a really good stratagem, right? If you have to get around things like Armor of Contempt or popping smoke or anything like that, Warrior's Bane is really good for your aspect warriors. It allows them to do their job exceptionally well. However, when we start looking at the other stratagems, we start to see a bit of a weakness, right? So Preternatural Precision is another good one, but it's another damage stratagem. If we look at Skyborn Sanctuary, that's a good defensive stratagem, but it does require you to have transports on the battlefield. However, when we look at the other strats, they're just simply not that good. So if we look at something like Kane's Vengeance, I think it's called, where Kane gets the, 8 damage and the, extra attacks or whatever that he gets from the ability. Honestly, it's not that good, right? And the reason why that stratagem's not that good is it's only for one model in the entire army, and the Avatar of Kane sucks, right? The Avatar of Kane is not good. Arguably, he's really bad in Aspect Host as well, because even though he gets the rerolls and stuff, he gets nothing else from the detachment. So that basically means that he doesn't have any durability. Arguably, the Avatar of Kane is better in Warhost because you can give him a -1 to hit. Anyway, the Avatar of Kane is not a competitive unit, so you're probably not going to see that, which means Aspect Host is going to be working with one less stratagem. They also have a stratagem that forces an enemy to take desperate escape tests when they fall back. Now, this can be good, but it's extremely situational, and it's something that I was surprised to see in Aspect Host, because to be honest, even though it is a more aggressive detachment, most opponents, if they get the chance to swing back against your Aeldari units, are just going to kill them, right? Especially Marine armies. If you charge into something and you don't fully obliterate that unit, they're going to swing back at you pretty hard, and they're going to probably destroy you. There's not a lot of armies that are going to actually fall back against you. And again, it is a CP, so you're going to have to, use some of your resources to use that ability, and it's really not that good. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you tie up something like a 4-man unit of Space Marines with some Striking Scorpions, and you manage to lock them down. Now, what your opponent can do is they can simply just fall back and take the desperate escape tests, and they're only losing on average like 1 model. So it's still worth it for a Space Marine squad to fall back from you and then shoot you to death, right? So it's still going to be a very situational stratagem that's only good in specific circumstances. However, Aspect Host does have a powerful detachment rule. Being able to reroll 1s to hit or wound is really good. And being able to ignore modifiers on your units when they shoot or fight in combat is strong. And of course, being able to give your squad lethal sustained hits and ignores cover, or, 2 of those if you use an aspect token, is very powerful as well. So this is a detachment that is really frontlining on damage. And I would say that this is going to be a strong contender for a detachment that's going to be a good counter into certain matchups. I think Aspect Host is really good against Death Guard because you can ignore all their BS modifiers. Oh, I have -1 to hit. I don't care. I'm going to use Warrior's Bane, right? Oh, you have, I have Armor of Contempt. I have +1 armor. If you're playing against Ultramarines, I don't care. I'm Aspect Host. I can just Warrior's Bane, right? The Crimson Hunter is also a really good model in Aspect Host, and actually, arguably, it's the only detachment where the Crimson Hunter actually works, because if you're firing at flying units, flying Demon Princes are the rage right now, you get +1 to hit, +1 to wound, you're re-rolling 1s to hit, and you can ignore modifiers and if you spend 2 command points, get lethal hits or sustained hits as well. So yeah, there's a lot of play for Crimson Hunters in the Aspect Host, and I think flyers are underrated as far as their ability to, succeed when you're going into a damage dealing detachment. So Aspect Host being a damage dealing detachment, Crimson Hunters work very well in that detachment. Okay. Anyway, moving on from Aspect Host, we have the number 4 spot, and I think this is going to solidly belong to Warhost. So I thought about this a lot. I think Warhost is still a detachment that can win tournaments, but people really haven't tried to play it a whole lot because it is that quote unquote basic detachment, right? And it doesn't seem like it has a lot of just pure strengths in any one direction. But what I like about Warhost is if you really think about it, it is the fastest of the detachments. You get +1 inch on every single battle focus maneuver that you use. So you're, instead of moving 9 inches with most of your Aspect Warriors, you're moving 10 inches. With Banshees, you're moving 11 inches. So you're moving really fast with Warhost. You're also able to get more tokens with Warhost, and your agile maneuvers are better. So you get +1 on your fade back and opportunity seized agile maneuvers as well. The stratagems are also really good. There's not a single stratagem on the list that's bad, which is a really big strength, unlike Aspect Host that has a couple of stinkers in there, right? So you have -1 to hit. That's great on a number of units. I really like using -1 to hit on a big Guardian Death Star with Eldrad and Warlocks, because not only are they going to be at -1 to hit, but they're also going to be at -1 to wound because of the Warlock's ability with Eldrad, which makes that a really tough unit to kill. On top of this, Warhost has a really good maneuverability stratagem in the case of Webway Portal. You can pull a unit from the battlefield and put it basically wherever you want out of strategic reserve. So if a unit has a deep strike like Swooping Hawks, you can basically, for 1 CP, use the Swooping Hawks like they used to be used with Skyleap, right? So you can jump around the battlefield and score objectives with a single unit of Swooping Hawks if need be. You can also do this with Rangers, right? So a cool thing to do with Rangers, if you don't have to screen out your opponent at all, you can pull them from the battlefield after they infiltrate on turn 1, and you can just redeploy them somewhere else. So the end of your opponent's turn, if they're not dead and they're not engaged, you can just pull them from the battlefield and put them wherever you want, which is really cool. Also, Warhost has arguably one of the best utility stratagems in the entire game, which is fall back, shoot, and charge, right? Being able to fall back from combat and still be able to shoot and charge something is something that is lacking from Aspect Host, and it's one of the reasons why I think Aspect Host is weaker, because a lot of Assault armies can charge your Wave Serpent, can kill your Wave Serpent, and then pile in to the next unit of Aspect Warriors, and you're not going to be able to do a lot of damage in combat, and then you're just going to be stuck in combat. So your unit of 10 Fire Dragons and your Wave Serpent, if your opponent destroys, your Wave Serpent in combat, maybe Magnus comes up to you or Mortarion comes up to you, kills your Wave Serpent, consolidates into your unit, you are shit out of luck in Aspect Host. But if you're running Warhost, you can fall back and shoot and charge. You also have one of the better damage dealing stratagems in Warhost. It's a little bit less effective than Aspect Host's version, but being able to get sustained hits within 12, and then of course if you already have sustained hits, you get sustained hits on 5s, is really powerful as well. Really good with things like Azurman and Tendire Avengers if you wanted to run that, or Fire Dragons. I actually think it's best on Fire Dragons because you have the chance of getting basically an extra fusion gun when you roll your dice, and as we know, Fire Dragons can always fish for 6s, and you do have that aspect token as well. So you can actually get quite a few Melta attacks out with your Fire Dragons in this detachment. So yeah, I really love this detachment. I've used it in several games. I think it's highly competitive. Some of my biggest wins have actually been with Warhost because it's so fast, people really don't expect it, and being able to move Warp Spiders 27 inches is a hell of a drug. Okay, let's look at spot number 3. So spot number 3, this is where we really get to start seeing some of the more competitive detachments, right? And I believe spot number 3 is going to go to Guardian Battle Host. So Guardian Battle Host, the thing I like about it is that it is just as maneuverable as Warhost in that it has a lot of abilities that allow you to move faster. So you get an auto advance 6 stratagem, which is really good. You get a enhancement that allows you to infiltrate with Storm Guardian units or Guardian units, which is super powerful, guys. A lot of armies like Death Guard and, others are getting cheap cultist-like infiltration units. Poxwalkers that can infiltrate up the battlefield are absolutely toxic, right? Super cheap unit that can infiltrate and basically prevent you from infiltrating yourself because they are a big unit, right? They can spread out across a large area of the battlefield. Well, guess what? Now you can do the same thing as them, right? With a squad of guardians, which are superior to Poxwalkers. So being able to infiltrate a 100-point unit up the battlefield and get into a good position is a good way to screen out your forces. Also, Guardian Battle Host has one of the best stratagems in the game, better than reinforcements, better than, Endless Tide for the, Tyranid players out there and Endless Swarm Detachment. And that is the ability to take a Guardian unit that is damaged from the battlefield, place it in strategic reserve, and then when it comes back in, having all the Guardians resurrected to full health, which is really awesome. So being able to do that and being able to combine it with Warlocks that allow you to get a tougher unit, right, that give you -1 to wound, is really strong. Also, Guardians in the army, when they're on objectives, are stronger as well because they get that +1 to hit from the detachment special rule. So your Guardians are hitting harder, I should say. Your Guardians are reducing the damage of enemy attacks with their -1 to wound on objectives. Or if you have Warlocks in the unit, they just have a native -1 to wound. And you're able to resurrect them every single turn for a single CP, which is really strong. You also have a pretty good ability and synergy with Warwalkers. Warwalkers are already really powerful with Guardian units because they need that extra AP boost to do some damage, especially the Warlocks with their Destructors. And if you add on to the fact that, you're going to get a lot of extra, durability out of this attachment, being able to resurrect things every turn, then you have a really powerful base for a solid list. Now, of course, Guardian Battle Host, I believe, does need Aspect Warrior support. I don't think you can just run 120 Guardians and say, hey, this is my, basically Guardian Horde. I don't know if that really works that well. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm completely mistaken and it's actually a viable strategy. But I do think you're going to use Aspect Warriors. I do think you're going to use things like Warwalkers, but also Fire Dragons, a couple Fire Dragons here and there, a couple Howling Banshees to protect you from close combat, being able to heroically intervene and so forth, are still going to be staples in Guardian Battle Host. I think the one weakness of Guardian Battle Host is that despite the -1 to wound and stuff like that, you're still looking at Guardian units, and a lot of armies, even with the -1 to wound, can still kill an entire unit of Guardians in a single shooting phase, so you do need to be very careful with them, right? Positioning is pretty key here, and you need to play a game that is very control-based. You're screening out with, units of Storm Guardians and stuff like that, and I think really you probably want about 4 units of Guardians in this particular army, perhaps even 5, so that you can constantly cycle Guardian units in and out of the battle and resurrect them at full health and basically outlast your opponent. Okay, that's Guardian Battle Host. I'm a big fan of the detachment. I'm not an expert in it, but I can see its power, especially since we've seen the Ynnead get nerfed so hard. So in the number 2 spot, it's going to have to go to Wind Rider Host. Wind Rider Host has quickly become one of the stronger detachments to take over the spot after the Ynnead nerfs. So why is Wind Rider Host powerful? Well, Wind Rider Host has the most damage out of any of the detachments in the Codex. It has very high damage, but it's also a huge glass cannon. Now, the strategy behind Wind Rider Host is pretty simple. In the early turns of the game, you're playing more passive. You're just focusing on killing enemy units with your units in your army. You're making trades, right? You're sending units of Wind Riders into the enemy backfield. You're getting a bunch of damage buffs. You're eliminating key targets. And then you're trading, right? They're going to kill your Wind Riders. But by the end of the game, by turns 4 and 5, you're going to have more units than your opponent does. And you're going to be able to dominate the battlefield from there. Also, being able to consistently score fixed objectives like establish locus in the enemy backfield and score behind enemy lines will give you an average of, probably about 34 points a match, 34, 35 points a match with your secondaries. So being able to score 3 points consistently on behind enemy lines, right, over the course of 5 turns is going to be 15 points. Being able to score 4 points on established locus every single turn is going to get you about 20 points. So you add those together, on average, you're going to get about 35 secondary victory points with the army. And of course, that is assuming that we don't, on a few turns, get 2 units in the enemy deployment zone for 4 points on behind enemy lines. So Wind Rider Host really does benefit from fixed objectives, and also being able to just cycle through a ton of enemy units as far as their damage dealing capabilities is pretty insane. And that's why I really love Wind Rider Host, because it's high damage, it's high maneuverability, and it's at the cost of durability and, battlefield control, which it doesn't really have a lot of. You're not going to see Wind Rider Host dominating the primary game, right? Wind Rider Host is going to be doing really well with the challenger cards that we get. So Wind Rider Host is typically going to be behind the game in turns 2, 3, 4, and even 5. 2, 3, and 4, not 5. By turns 5, you should be winning the game, right? But in those 3 crucial turns, turn 2, 3, and 4, they might be trailing by 6 points. So that's where the challenger cards come in. Because on turn 5, you have a big go turn, you eliminate everything in your opponent's army, and you're able to dominate the battlefield and score max points at the end. So I think Wind Rider Host is going to be very strong. I think it's extremely strong into the new matchups. We're seeing a ton of Space Marines on the battlefield. We're seeing a ton of damage or wound 4 infantry. And what's good against wound 4 infantry? Damage 2 weapons with a lot of AP value. A single unit of Wind Riders can smoke a unit of, Death Shroud Terminators pretty much off the board, right? If you consider the fact that they have lethal hits, they're re-rolling all of their hits, they're also getting, possibly +1 to wound with Eldrad and stuff like that, because you are going to have units like Eldrad in the list. You're going to be getting the ability to re-roll wounds because of the stratagem in Wind Rider Host. When you arrive from reserve, you can re-roll wounds. You can also get -1 additional AP, and you can get Ignore's cover with Warlock Skyrunners. So yeah, these units end up just pretty much blending anything that is infantry out there. Really strong detachment. And with the buff to Warwalkers, Wind Rider Host lists have gotten a little bit cheaper because you can take more Warwalkers now, or Warwalkers that were already in your Wind Rider Host list are just going to allow you to take more stuff, which is really cool. Okay, so Wind Rider Host, definitely one of the strongest detachments in the book. But what is the strongest? Well, obviously, guys, it's going to be Seer Council. So I called this basically when I did my first review. I personally thought Seer Council was the strongest detachment. I know that Ynnead is really strong, but Seer Council for me was second and Warhost was first when I did my first review. After having played Seer Council consistently, it has quickly become my favorite detachment. I love the Seer Council. I love how it plays. I love how much pressure it puts on your opponent, and it really puts a huge mental overload on your opponent on, basically every front. So what does the Seer Council do well? Well, the Seer Council has the best CP economy in the entire game. Now that, Guilliman and the Ultramarine BS got nerfed, so they can't do that anymore. They can't just stack CP upon CP forever. Seer Council is now the most CP efficient army in the game. You get 6 free stratagems that you can use throughout the battle. It is random. You do roll it at the beginning, but you can use the enhancement Lucid Eye to fix that a little bit for yourself. And I think Lucid Eye is probably a really good include. I don't think it's 100% mandatory, but I also think it's really strong. So it just really depends on your list and if you want to, maybe add an extra unit or you want to take the Lucid Eye. Really, usually that's what it's going to come down to. So yeah, Seer Council, really good stratagem support. The stratagems are also really good, right? Like if the detachment had poor stratagems, I would probably not like it too much. The only thing about the detachment is all the stratagems require you to be within 9 inches of a psyker, but this is no problem because the actual detachment rules and stuff like that kind of want you to have psychers in the list, right? Psychers are good. You want Eldrad, you want Farseers, you want Warlocks. All of those are really powerful in this detachment. So basically, the stratagems are insane. One of the stratagems, which has quickly become my favorite for just winning games on single dice rolls, is Presentiment of Dread. Being able to target an enemy unit within 18 inches of a friendly psyker and divisible, and make them take a battle shock test in the command phase. And by the way, that works in your command phase or the enemy command phase, is borderline busted. So sometimes it just doesn't happen. It does take some pre-planning to get line of sight and everything like that on an enemy unit. But if you can swing it, being able to basically make your enemy take a battle shock test at -1 and make them lose their primary objective, if they fail it, is potentially game winning. And when I say broken, I don't mean it's ridiculously OP or anything like that, but when it does go off, your opponent is just instantly going to lose victory points, right? So it's huge. It can lead to some huge power spikes and swings in victory points in the game. We also have a stratagem that is probably one of the best defensive stratagems in close combat in the entire game, which is -1, -1. So -1 to hit, -1 to wound in combat, which is Forewarned. Forewarned is pretty damn insane as well. You also have a stratagem that allows you to get Ignores Cover and critical AP on wound rolls for your unit in the shooting phase, which is insane on things like Seer Council when you're, targeting a unit of Storm Guardians with 4 Warlocks, and you're just able to throw out a blistering number of attacks with really high strength, really high AP, and Ignores Cover. It really can just chew through enemy units very quickly. You also have one of the best defensive stratagems as far as damage goes in the entire game, which is Ish's Fury. You don't need line of sight to this either, which is really cool. So that means units that are moving onto objectives that you have psychers nearby on, who are out of line of sight, maybe behind a wall, have to take 6, or, well, basically, you roll 6 dice. On 3 pluses, you deal mortal wounds. So on average, you're going to be taking 4 mortals on your enemy units. This is really good at killing lone ops as well. So a cool thing you can do is shoot a Warlock Skyrunner up within, kind of 9 inches of a lone operative. And if they end their movement within 9 inches of that psyker, they're going to be taking mortal wounds, which is really powerful. You also have an ability to give your infantry units 18-inch lone op, which is really good at protecting things like Dark Reapers and, your Guardian units in the backfield. Basically, your opponent can't shoot you at long range, right? They have to get up close and personal. And then lastly, probably the best stratagem in the entire bunch, Unshrouded Truth, which allows your unit to be picked up in the movement phase and repositioned anywhere on the battlefield outside of 9 inches of enemy units, which is an insane mobility stratagem, and it allows for some really insane plays. On top of this, WTC and UKTC recently ruled that you could use Baharoth and 10 Hawks to deep strike in the reinforcement step, use their grenade pack, and then you can use Unshrouded Truth on the unit to pull them and reposition them wherever you want. Now, personally, I think this is unintended by GW. However, GW did not address it. They did not address it in the latest balance patch, so I have to assume that GW thinks it's fine and that basically it's intended. So, there you go. Whoever discovered that, you're a mad genius. I won't be personally using that because I don't think it's I think it's a little bit cheesy, but I fully encourage anybody who's playing competitively and wants to win in tournaments and stuff, go for it because it's an absolutely brutal combination. So yeah, Seer Council has a lot of tricks up its sleeve, best CP generation in the game, and basically guys, just to let you know, typically speaking, when a faction is really good at regenerating CP, it means you have your pick of stratagems, abilities, and also the ability to choose your own secondaries as you want them, cycle out as many of them as you want to get the best ones possible. So you have a huge advantage over an army that can't do that. So if an army can't generate extra CP or has no ability to, like Ynnead, you're going to get a huge advantage over that faction because you're going to be able to score more points more consistently throughout the game. So yeah, Seer Council, what an amazing detachment. I personally think it's the best. I think it's been honestly very close to being as good as Ynnead between you and me. It's just it's a little harder to play than Ynnead, right? Ynnead was not as hard to play in my honest opinion as Seer Council. But Seer Council definitely had a lot of teeth even when the codex first came out and when people were going goo-goo over Ynnead. And I said this once and I'll say it a million times. A lot of people, when Seer Council came out, they thought it sucked. But if you really looked at it and really started playing it and understanding the synergies and how the list worked, it started to become very clear to a lot of good Aeldari players that actually this detachment is awesome. So yeah, it's definitely propelled its way to first place, and I think that is a justified position for one of the coolest detachments in the entire game. Let's hope GW doesn't nerf it to the ground like they did the Ynnead in the next 3 months. Alright guys, that is going to be our detachment tier list. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. What do you guys think is the best? What do you like the most? You know, what do you think about the Ynnead, unfortunately, that, you know, now they're down at the bottom. They were hero to zero basically overnight. But, you know, let me know what you guys think in the comments section. And I want to thank all my patrons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last 2 years. Your help has been greatly appreciated. And once again, I truly, truly thank you. If you do want to become a patron and help support the channel, I have a Patreon free trial that you can join up to get free access to our channel Discord. I'll leave the link for that in the description. I also have a channel store page that you can, you know, kind of look at to get some Eldar inspired apparel off of at a discount. I believe there's a 20% discount or 25% discount going on right now on it. So you can get some pretty cheap t-shirts with some cool Aeldari designs. And lastly, I have an Amazon affiliate link that you can use for some discounted Eldar minis. Alright guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.